So the playoffs are coming to a conclusion, and I decided to make a video kind of breaking down all the things that we've learned. I was going to make this one video, but there's so much to gather within the last month or month and a half of basketball that I decided to just break it up into two parts. And with the Eastern Conference already concluding and we all knowing that the Boston Celtics are going to the NBA Finals, I decided to go with the East first, and then later on we'll talk about the West. So what have we learned so far, Eastern Conference Playoffs edition? First, we had the Miami Heat, and honestly, didn't really learn too much about Miami this year, dog. Unfortunately, this team had a very clear and defined ceiling heading to the postseason, in large part because not only did they face a Boston Celtics team that is heavily favored, but also Jimmy Butler, unfortunately, was not available to play in the series. Bam still played really well, looked like the second best player for most of that 5-game series. Tyler Hero struggled, but he's not supposed to be the best offensive player for a team, so that was bound to happen. However, what we did learn about Miami goes outside of this series, but still is centered around Jimmy Butler, and that is his future with Miami. In particular, the rumors circulating around his name is bringing us towards a 2-year max contract extension that is supposed to be in a ballpark of roughly around $110 million. Now, of course, there's constant conversations about what exactly this means for Miami, Jimmy Butler, and just the value or the perceived value of Jimmy Butler in the NBA. Me personally, I believe that value is relative, meaning that the value that you provide really just depends on the team that is willing to pay you. And if you are Miami, you could very well argue that Jimmy has more or less been a max contract player for your team over the past 2 to 3 years now. There has been consistent deep postseason success, exceeding expectations by a fairly wide margin, and it certainly makes Miami a bit more of an interesting landing spot for potential disgruntled stars that could be coming up in the next year or two. And if that is a selling point, which I think honestly is a really good one, I do understand why Jimmy Butler believes that he is worthy of a 2-year max contract extension. However, as much as I may love Jimmy Butler, doesn't have the greatest track record of staying healthy, also doesn't have the greatest track record of being available during the regular season and playing at a certain level that would warrant a max contract. Also, you have to take into consideration that he is 34 going on 35, but I do believe a huge reason why this is all very interesting is because of two reasons. The first being the whole Dwayne Wade situation that happened a couple of years ago. D Wade was in a very similar situation where he was looking for a max contract. He sacrificed financially to make sure that Miami could build a super team, and when Wade felt like it was his time to receive his loyalty payday, well, Miami, they just didn't feel like it was necessary, especially because he was getting older. If he didn't receive a max contract extension, why would Jimmy believe he's going to receive one? I think that is a very, very fair question to ask. And so if Miami's not willing to pay Jimmy, you have to beg the question, who exactly is willing to be in the market to give Jimmy that type of money for him to believe that his evaluation should be so high? Which brings us to our next team, and that is the Philadelphia 76ers. If there's one word that I can really define when it comes to Philly, it is desperate. This year in Philadelphia, unfortunately, it was basically just a wasted season. Unfortunately, Joel Embiid missed a significant amount of time in the regular season, so much so that Philly found themselves sliding all the way in the standings to the 7th seed. He was available to come back for the playoffs, but clearly was nowhere near 100% healthy. In the series against the New York Knicks, he did look still really, really good and dominant, and to be fair to Tyrese Maxey, he exceeded my expectations all season long, so that is something to gain. Averaged nearly 30 points, 5 rebounds, 7 assists on shooting splits of 48, 40, and 89. Maxey is ascending into a fringe all-NBA caliber player, which is great. However, a much bigger picture and why we've led down this lane of desperation from the Sixers is what happened in the beginning part of the season when they fumbled James Harden. If you are the Philadelphia 76ers, losing someone like James Harden was definitely detrimental to a team that shouldn't be overly depending on the excellence of Joel Embiid. I think it's pretty clear at this point in time that at this stage of his career, Embiid cannot carry a franchise the same way that a Giannis, a Jokic, or a Luka can. So he needs as much consistent offensive weaponry or just consistent star power around him to help him weather the storm from an 82-game regular season, which then brings us to where we are today and why I say they're so desperate. And it's because now there's rumors circulating that the Sixers are willing to just hand out max contracts regardless of who they are because this team is trying to build a big three. There's been conversations circulating around Paul George receiving a max contract as well as Jimmy Butler, which kind of goes back to the whole Miami Heat situation. Sure, you don't want to lose Jimmy Butler, but you might have to pay him at least somewhere near max money because you don't want to lose him to a rival team in the exact same conference. However, I have to just beg and ask the question, why are you doing this now? I sat here, I made a whole entire video explaining to people why the Sixers were failing Joel Embiid because they allowed James Harden to walk for effectively nothing. And I was told either, oh, it's just Harden's fault, and oh, it's just Joel Embiid's fault, and oh, and making a whole bunch of excuses for an organization that just made a very, very terrible decision. It just screams desperate. It just screams it very loudly. And speaking on one desperate team to another, we have the Cleveland Cavaliers. Now, Cleveland actually made it a little bit farther in the playoffs than I thought they were going to. I assumed they were going to get knocked out in the first round, but they actually made it to the second round, did lose to the Boston Celtics. But in doing so, I believe Donovan Mitchell played fantastic, but that's kind of where it stops, which has been an ongoing, consistent theme for the past 2 years now, where this team is over leveraging Donovan Mitchell's excellence in terms as a ball handler, shot creator, and passer and playmaker, and hoping that he can generate enough offense for a team that struggles in generating offense for themselves. Easily the biggest disappointment over the past couple of years have been the two young players in Darius Garland and especially Evan Mobley, as Mobley's offensive game really has not developed and matured in a way in which you want it to. And the reason for this is because you need to convince Donovan Mitchell to stay long term. Because of this, there's been constant conversation and action. It's already been made about this team on what exactly they're going to do in terms of changes. The first being firing head coach JB Bickerstaff. Whole article came out talking about how he was potentially incompetent. Some of his coaching style really didn't mesh well with a lot of the players, and in particular how they ran practice really came across as useless. This then kind of culminated into also talking about what this team can do from a personnel standpoint, and the players that continue to get highlighted are not only one or two of the young players in DG or Mobley, but also Jared Allen looking to be shifted as well to bring in as much offensive weaponry or just a more complete and competent team around Donovan Mitchell so he can commit to this team long term, as he only has one more guaranteed year left on his contract as well. Now, there have been conflicting stories about where Donovan Mitchell wants to go, some saying that it's fine and he wants to stay, but also that kind of contradicts not only other stories, but also the action of firing JB Bickerstaff. So there probably are some concerns and questions about what exactly this team is going to do. And if he did feel so great about the roster construction, there probably wouldn't be this much conversation trading Darius Garland and or Jared Allen or Evan Mobley. Regardless if that means if D. Mitch goes or stays, and if he does stay, more than likely there's going to be other players on his team that will be relocated to other rosters in the NBA. Then we have the Orlando Magic and the Indiana Pacers, two really, really young teams who went into this playoff run with little to no expectations. In terms of Orlando, I thought they were going to get past the first round in large part because I thought the ceiling for some of their players offensively were a bit higher than it was for the, Cleveland Cavaliers. But unfortunately, I was proven wrong. Paolo had a really, really great series, but the player that really disappointed me was Franz Wagner. His shot has fallen off the face of this earth. And also outside of, I believe, Paolo and Jonathan Isaac, everybody else on that team shot below 33% from behind the arc. This is a huge reason why there's been conversations of them also going after some veteran pieces, throwing around a lot of money, in particular Paul George, and maybe if you're desperate enough, even Klay Thompson. Yikes! But hey, man, do what you need to do. In terms of Indiana, I'm kind of torn because I do want to congratulate them. Shout out to Indiana Pacers for making it as deep as they did. I don't think many people assumed they were going to do so. But hey, man, I mean, in a conference where you avoided the Boston Celtics to the conference finals, as well as a bunch of injuries, not only to your first round matchup, but to your second round matchup as well. I mean, I don't know what all you can gauge from this postseason run. You had great offense, even when Halliburton was off the floor. Your defense was very spotty and shaky. You need some interior presence on both sides of the floor. Pascal Siakam was actually a really good addition. He played really solid throughout his entire postseason run, as Siakam averaged roughly around 22 points, 7.5 rebounds, roughly 4 assists, and shot 54% from the field. But, it's the East, so I don't really know what you're going to make out of it. Which then leads us to the top 3 teams in the Eastern Conference: Milwaukee, New York, and Boston. First, when it comes to Milwaukee, honestly, we didn't really learn too much about the Bucks in this playoff run, which honestly is not good whatsoever. This is a team that made really steep commitments in the beginning of the season, in particular firing Budenholzer, bringing in Griffin, obviously trading Drew Holiday, bringing in Damian Lillard, and was really trying to formulate this offensive juggernaut duo between Dame and Giannis that never really meshed too well all regular season long. Of course, some people who were optimistic assumed that when the playoffs kind of came around that they were going to be so dynamic and so unstoppable that it didn't really matter about the regular season standings, but unfortunately, we didn't really see that pan out at all because of the injuries. Also, in terms of Doc Rivers and his coaching style, he wasn't really being able to put to the test either because he didn't really have the personnel to compete against the Indiana Pacers. I do believe us not learning much about anything about the Bucks could hurt them in the backside, because instead of going into this offseason looking to make significant improvements because of what may occur in the playoffs, the Bucks could very well have this level of contentness, believe that this was an off year, and kind of go into the next year a fresh start, giving Doc Rivers a full training camp, another offseason between Dame and Giannis working alongside one another, and hopefully Chris Middleton can look a bit healthier than he did for most of this next year as well. However, I believe that this team has very significant problems, in particular defensively. And also, Brook Lopez is getting worse. Quiet as kept. Giannis isn't the same defender he is either. And I genuinely believe that there were very, very legitimate concerns around Damian Lillard all season long. Those are all things that are just not being addressed. And I do believe the injuries that this team sustained can manifest a level of contentness that will lead this team going back into next year with the exact same flaws. And unfortunately, probably won't address these flaws until probably another 365 days. So that's terrible. Then we have the New York Knicks. And honestly, I believe this team has learned the most because now they know we don't need Julius Randle for postseason success. This is a team that effectively missing like 6 rotational players, only playing like 8-man lineups. Many of these players receiving like 38, 39, 40 minutes on a night-to-night basis. In particular, Josh Hart playing almost all 48 minutes for some of these games, and they looked really, really good. Was some of that shooting from Josh Hart fake? Probably so. Shooting luck, you know what I'm saying? You know, same thing with Dante DiVincenzo. Hey man, could be some shooting luck. Gotta give a lot of props to the players out there. Like I said, Josh Hart, Dante DiVincenzo, Isaiah Hartenstein. My goodness, he's been a heaven sent. The OG Anunoby transaction really worked out for them. And then obviously you have Jalen Brunson. He had a bunch of Iverson moments all throughout this postseason run, just being able to carry the offense, not only from a scoring perspective, but also from a passing and playmaking perspective as well. Had some ridiculous scoring nights that were just unfathomable and broke some records, not only for the Knicks, but also for the entire NBA. As Jalen Brunson finishes postseason run averaging an impressive 32 points, 7.5 assists, 3 rebounds, a steal, shooting splits of 44, 31, and 77. The shooting splits aren't the greatest, but be very mindful that he was effectively just thrusted into a conversation of being the best ball handler, passer, playmaker, scorer, basically the entire offensive hub for this team. And taking into consideration this is basically his first time ever doing that to this level, I think he really managed himself really, really well throughout the entire postseason run. It does suck that, you know, he had to clock in 40 minutes on a night-to-night basis. That sucks. And Thibodeau, you're nasty. We're on to you, Tibbs. You're doing it again. Nevertheless, I think that being able to see that Brunson has the ability to kind of, you know, really carry the offensive burden for a deep postseason run, I think that's very, very valuable for a team that needs to be moving off of Julius Randle. What exactly you get for Julius Randle in the offseason, I don't know, because I do believe this also hurt his value as well. Personally, I really do believe it does beg the question, what exactly do you get for Julius Randle? Because whatever you're going to get is probably going to make this team even better. Shout out to Jalen Brunson, man. Entering to stardom, man. Fringe top 10, in my opinion. And then finally, we got the Boston Celtics. I don't know, man. This is another time where you just don't learn much about the Boston Celtics, and that's not a good thing, man. Boston basically skated through an Eastern Conference that was injury-riddled. Fair enough, they did have injuries on their own, in particular with Kristaps Porzingis, but the East was so weak this year that you can't really gauge how good this Boston Celtics team is. They dominated the first 2 rounds. In the last round where they didn't necessarily dominate it, they still swept, but those games were much closer than what they honestly should have been. There are a lot of questions and concerns about the switching defense that I don't think they should be relying on. Questions and concerns about the shot selection still, the settling for jump shots between Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum, and then you still have the shooting variance. Tatum so far this postseason run is shooting 29% from 3. Jrue Holiday is still somehow shooting 40% from 3. Same with Derek White as well. Al Horford has somehow dipped below 35% from 3, and then now Sam Hauser, who probably isn't going to receive that many minutes, he's now shooting under 33 or 32%. That's also a problem. But it's really hard to criticize a team that really was able to just go through the Eastern Conference and never really face a challenge. So you're not really learning anything from them. But again, I think that is a huge problem. This is a team that has consistently looked good over the past 3 to 4 years, but still kind of falls into these same problems in terms of shot selection, IQ, execution, redundancy that we still kind of saw this entire playoff run, but really wasn't challenged by anybody in the Eastern Conference who had the personnel to capitalize on these potential weaknesses and flaws, which is why I believe didn't really learn too much about Boston. And if the first challenge that they receive is in the finals, that might be too late into the postseason run. They could potentially lose, and I think that's an ongoing feeling that a lot of people have. They still dominated. I still think that the defense is really, really good, especially when they don't switch. And in particular, I do believe the Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum duo gets a lot of flack. Nevertheless, still, I believe that the duo is more than serviceable. I just think the execution and lack of passing and playmaking will continue to hurt them in the backside. And if they match up with the right team team in the finals. Hey man, you never really know. But hey, that's just my thoughts. That's the video. Please let me know what you think about the video in the comment section below. What did you learn? Also, when the playoffs conclude on the West Coast, I will be making a Western Conference video as well, so stay tuned for that. But as always, hit the subscribe button, notification bell, and until next time, I'll see you all later. Peace.